And so everybody last night was said, "How come you got through so soon?" So if you're really interested in something, the time, you don't really notice the time. So I don't know. You might go on till midnight tonight, but if you do, you can fall asleep. It'd be hard to fall asleep. So brother, you come on and
Thank you.
take care. Don't trip over the.
Worldviews Training is what it is, Leadership Training Institute of America. And we train students to understand the conflict that's going on in our world, to understand our environment, the humanism tsunami that I was talking about last night, overrunning us. And if we're not prepared, and I see a lot of students coming out of churches and from Christian homes who come to the university, which is my mission field, academic communities. And I see students who come into that community life, and I describe it as lambs for the slaughter. That's what it is. They're unprepared to give answers to every man that asks of the reason of the hope. And it's not just giving an answer, it's a demand. How can you possibly believe anything so idiotic as the Bible? So a group of men wrote the Bible. You just accept that? You just believe it because someone said it's thus saith the Lord? And so students are unprepared for that, to give answers. And it's really an unfortunate situation, and it's a very sad situation that takes place. And so a number of years ago, as a result of being involved in the campus ministry and collegiate ministries, my goal was to help students prepare themselves for college life. But then with the forming of Leadership Training Institute of America, it was open for anybody and everybody, whether you're going to college. You have to be ready to give an answer to survive, which is unfortunate when you have to think in those terms as a Christian. We ought to be on the offensive. We ought to be the aggressors. We ought to be assertive with the Word of God, going out and sharing the gospel message and making disciples, right? That's what God's called us to do. That's our mission in life. That's what it means to be Christian. Go, teach, baptize, and teach. So we have our job description. We know what we're supposed to do. We have the early church descriptions and role modeling that's going on in the Bible. And we know what we're supposed to be doing, but we're not. And by and large, we're not doing it. And when we are engaged in the Great Commission, we're doing a very, very low-key job. Now that's because of we're consumed by the culture. Our energies and our attention, our concentration to the Word of God and what God's left us here for, it just gets sucked out of us. We run low in energy for God. We give Him whatever's left over in our life, which is a terrible place to think about. God gets the leftovers. He didn't like that in the Old Testament. He doesn't like it in the New Testament either. And as a result, we see that effect. And so it's part of the winding down of earth history, which will lead to His coming, and that is that the days are ever increasing in darkness and intensity of just a humanistic and ungodly influence. I wanted to share with you before we begin here. Let's see. I'll make sure this comes up. I was going to show you the PowerPoint. I guess I have to close that out so you can see that. No? Okay. It's a web it's a website, and that it just may not come up. So I should have looked at that earlier. But what I was wanting to show you was 3 pages on creationinsights.org. On that web page, it's the web page that I use. I present a lot of the information that I'm going through tonight. In fact, I present more than I'm going to be talking about. And so it's a resource that you can go and access, and it organizes the material. I was mentioning last night, one of the most important things you can do in both learning and communicating the principles of creation science, the apologetics of creation science, is organizing the material so it makes sense. Oftentimes, when you hear debates or you read books, whether it's by evolutionists or creationists, the material is disjointed, or it's good information, but it's not developed well. It's not systematic. It doesn't flow. It's just good information, and next chapter, here's some more good information, and so it's just disjointed information. My niche is to put things together, and I really saw the value of this in creation science, both in my personal testimony, but also when I was asked to direct the Summit Ministries in Arkansas. I found myself in a situation there in the Ozarks, in the area where the Summit Ministry was taking place. They were showing DVDs, which were great standalone lectures, but without someone standing up and showing, well, now here's how this lecture connects with the next lecture, and putting it all together and giving behind the scenes. The students were just getting a lot of information, good information, but it wasn't connected and making a whole lot of sense. That is the niche that I have really worked hard at to fit into and to help people understand. Here's why you present this idea first. There is a reason to present some ideas first, and biblically, Solomon said that there's line upon line, precept upon precept. There is a biblical basis for understanding that ideas and thoughts ought to be systematically and logically developed. There's benefit in that. And so that's what I'm doing tonight. And last night I left off with the organization of material. And I'm going to back this up, and we'll look at this. Let's see. Evidences for creation science model. Now, we're not going to look at all the evidences, but I've organized this material for you so that you can see how it all builds. I take this to university settings. I take this to hostile audiences. Hostile meaning that they're skeptics, and yes, some people do get angry who don't agree with you. But in the world of skeptics, I have presented this outline. It is very effective. I've had a number of professors in biology, even an evolution professor, who said, this makes the creation science model credible. That's my goal. And another professor came up, shook my hand, and said, this is the way to present it. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. This material is well presented. So I want to share that with you so that you recognize the value of the organization of topics. Not just the topics and the ideas, but the organization is very important. We start out with intelligent design, and that's what we're going to talk about this evening. And first law of thermodynamics, hopefully we'll get into that. Second law of thermodynamics. We're also going to look at the law of biogenesis, and then we'll look at law of probabilities. We're not going to talk much about laboratory research unless we got some biochemists here. Any biochemists? Okay. Well, typically there's not, but maybe future, yes. So, but this is not introductory biochemistry, so. But I will give you, I'll show you some thoughts and tell you what not to say anyway, and the value of using that. Then you have speciation research and fossil record. So these are the evidences laid out in that particular order. I like to point out that the organization of this material is probably the most important thing you'll hear in this conference, Creation Science Conference. I was in an ongoing debate for 2.5 years, friendly debate, with Dr. Cherry, who is an amateur anthropologist and a medical doctor, radiologist up at a local hospital in Fayetteville area, and then Dr. Name pops out of my head. The geologist, dendrochronologist over at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Malcolm Cleveland. Yeah, I just saw him last week. And he was there in the debate. We had a high school teacher that sat in. We had a mechanical engineer who was there as well, and then his wife, the engineer's wife, was there as well. And we met at their home. For 2.5 years, we had an ongoing debate. And my goal comes out of personal experience when I was trying to make sense out of all this stuff. As an evolutionist, I knew what evolution taught, and I was trying to make sense out of creationism. Was I going to be a creationist or not, and was there anything to accept here? The organization material was very frustrating because it's very little organization for the most part. It's gotten better over the years. But back in the 70s, it was very disjointed. And so my goal was to set up folders, and I had 6 folders on 3 different topics. The arguments for the supernatural creation of the universe, arguments against. Well, I guess I had 12 or 16 folders because I had 4. Then I had arguments for evolution and against evolution for each topic. But basically you had 3 main topics: origin of the universe, origin of life, origin of species. If you keep those arguments separate, then you realize you got 3 different classes of evidence, 3 different classes of questions, and 3 different classes of answers, not to be confused with the other 2 classes. Your arguments for origin of the universe are for the origin of the universe, not for life and not for species. Likewise, for life is not for universe and not for species. And arguments for species, not for life and universe. All right. Now, Brother Gary, you look like you're following. You really got that. Yes. Okay. I just want to emphasize how important this organization is. So if you're taking notes, you can get it. You go out on the website, creationinsights.org. I've got it laid out in 3 tabs: origin of the universe, origin of life, origin of species, and you'll see the information and the development of the argument for each of these 3 areas. So that's additional resource. So as I'm talking, you don't have to worry about taking full notes because the notes are already written out for you. All right, let's begin with design argument. This is a positive, supportive case for creation. The evolutionists like to argue the point, well, you creationists just attack evolution, but that doesn't establish creation as a legitimate scientific model. All right, here is the evidence for a legitimate scientific model called creation science. Charles Thaxton is back in the States. He was teaching in Prague there in the Czech Republic at Charles University, and I believe that's where he was when he made this comment. But he was a creationist, is a creationist. He said, in ordinary life, we distinguish natural from intelligent causes all the time. Police officers determine whether a person died of natural causes or was murdered. Archaeologists decide whether a chipped rock is just a rock or a Paleolithic tool. We do recognize that we can find design. How many have heard of design arguments favoring the creation science model? Nobody's heard of that? Okay. So, intelligent design. So what is intelligent design? We ought to start there then. Since you're not familiar with it. Intelligent design is what? Yes, that's right. That is the cause of everything. But because an intelligent mind designed creation, we ought to be able to recognize, hey, that's a designed product there. That's why he's mentioning looking at a rock, and can you tell whether a rock has been sort of shaped out by river currents and grinding of soil, or if it was chipped out and formed by design, and some intelligent being sat there and chipped it out and designed it? Can you tell the difference? Well, see, if you can shake your head, yes, I can tell the difference between a river rock that's just laying out there and a rock that's been chipped out and made into an arrowhead. Yes, you can say, I can recognize the difference between a natural product and an intelligently designed product that was done on purpose. When we talk about intelligent design arguments, we're looking for evidence that when you look at the world, it has all the markings of being an arrowhead and not just a rock that's been tossed in the riverbed. And we're looking out here, we're looking at the molecules, we're looking at the planets, we're looking at life, we're looking at everything. Does it show design, or does it indicate, oh, it's just a natural, accidental, haphazard process that pulled it all together? From nothing, everything came. Nothing exploded and produced everything. That's what it comes down to. And they really believe this. And I got a quote for you later on. Because it's just unbelievable anyone would say that. But they do. So I have to put the quotes like this in there. Now, the rebuttal is, you cannot test God. You cannot determine, you can't put God in a test tube. You can't determine that God had motive and purpose behind creation. Therefore, you can't look for intelligent design. Can you find the Indian that made the arrowhead and determine? Do you have to know the Indian's motive to determine whether that rock is an arrowhead intelligently designed or just a river rock? No, you do not. You see, what a fallacy of thought. And yet that is one of their common rebuttals. You can't put God in a test tube, therefore creation science is unscientific. We don't apply that to all other areas where you can't find the creator of some object, so why would we exclude God? Well, only for one reason. You've already presupposed that there's no God. That's why. And then you're just throwing out arguments that don't make sense except to you because you already accept the conclusion. And that's really what that is the truth of it. That's what's going on here. They do not see that. And to be fair, there's a lot of Christians who do the same thing, and they don't see it because, well, they already believe it. But we need to be able to examine our thoughts for consistency and rationality. Now, in doing that and thinking about the rebuttal of the evolutionists, they say you can't be scientific and have design. We go to the SETI program. Anybody ever heard of SETI? Search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So we're looking for life. We're looking for life on Mars. They've excluded intelligent life. They're looking for microbial life. And so whenever you hear, anybody seen the headlines that every now and then comes out? Water, life has been found on Mars. No, it's not. So they found some ice crystals. I mean, water, I mean, we drink water every day. A water molecule, H2O, is a molecule. It's not life. Oh, but it's water, and we know that life requires water, and 70% of our bodies are made of water, and there's oceans full of life. All right, so life likes to use water, but that doesn't mean there's life. Where there's water, there's life. I mean, I was drinking water out of a bottle this morning, and there was no life in it. I mean, it was water molecules. So it doesn't compute that because where there's water, there's life. Unless you want it to be there, you see. And so that's the big idea. Now life is on Mars because they found water. It doesn't make sense. Then they're looking further out and they say, hey, we have Earth-like planets. Life. That's what the headline says. Well, number one, we haven't been out there. We're looking at the wobbles and the orbiting, and we're looking at radiation patterns and light waves and evaluating, well, oxygen is producing those light waves and hydrogen and so on. Hey, that's coming in the vicinity. Yeah, but that's Look how far away that is, and you're saying that there's a planet out there like Earth, and therefore there's life. Only because you want to see it, because you want life to be there. That's the only reason. Now, they say you can't be scientific and look for life, and yet they're looking for life. Search for extra intelligent life out in space. They're collecting signals based on what premise? That you can distinguish intelligently designed, created signals, radiation signals, from naturally random produced signals coming from stars. Wait, what did you say? You can distinguish between the natural and the intelligently designed radiation patterns. You what? You can? Is that scientific? Absolutely. We're spending millions of dollars searching for life, intelligently designed signals coming from outer space. But I thought you said it's not possible to search for intelligently designed evidence. It's unscientific. Well, if it involves God. But we can search for life in outer space. You going to be able to talk to those guys and interview them and determine their motive? Can you put them in a test tube? No, but because the signals are intelligently designed, we can distinguish intelligent design from naturally created productions. We can conclude that there's intelligent life in the universe. So you believe that intelligent design is possible to conclude unless it's from God. What is that? That's a presupposition to exclude God out of the equation. You presuppose that you've already arbitrarily excluded God as a possibility. Anything else can be entertained, but not God. You see, that's unscientific. That's what I was in that course of evolution that was required of me. I had to take a course. And I kept asking Dr. Carr, well, what if God did create? If the evidence was there and you've arbitrarily excluded the notion that we can't entertain the idea of God, if you've arbitrarily excluded him from the conclusions, possible conclusions, then how will you ever recognize that there's a God out there? That's unscientific. A scientist should follow the evidence and accept the conclusion that it leads you to. That's scientific. Not to arbitrarily exclude before you go into the laboratory, you look for the evidence, and have already precluded, not concluded, but precluded what the evidence will show you. That's unscientific. Well, they argue the case, and they are practicing and spending millions of dollars investigating and searching for intelligent design. You see, let's be consistent. There's nothing wrong with the creation science model involving research or a search for intelligent design. All right, now they got the SETI program and they're looking for radiation signals. Now here's a remarkable thing. We have built in all living cells on Earth, all living organisms on Earth, have a code. It's not Morse code, dit, 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 dash, 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 dit, dit, dit. Now that's a pretty simple signal compared to the code that's coming out of our DNA molecule. Our DNA molecule has not only dits and dashes, but it has dots and bots. So it's got a 4-letter code. And in that 4-letter code, it is describing and telling the cell what it is going to do. It's a program molecule. How many computer programmers do we have here? One? We have at least one. We have two. All right, so we've got a couple of programmers, you see. You can appreciate that what we see in the living cell is a program molecule. You can go in and change the molecule. You can go in and change the program, and you change the computer, its behavior. You can change the behavior of the cell by changing its program. It's a program molecule. Now, how did the computer get its program? Somebody put it there. It was intelligently designed. Man, we got a signal. We got a signal coming here, a message, an encoded message in the DNA molecule in every living cell. Now, in your body, you've got about 10 trillion living cells. You are multicellular. A bacteria is unicellular, only one cell. But you have 10 trillion cells, the bacteria on your body. You have an additional 100 trillion, 10 times more bacteria cells on your body than you have in your own body. That's how small these critters are. You're loaded down with a couple pounds of bacteria, and boy, talk about weight loss. Man, all I have to do is get rid of these bacteria. I don't even have to get rid of my own weight. Yeah, but you'd have other problems if you got rid of those friends. So these bacteria are loaded down. I'm just making the point that over 100 trillion living cells just associated with your body personally, times 7 billion people, and then there's more bacteria than there are all other living organisms. And then you add the fungi, kingdom fungi, and kingdom plantae, and you add the protista, and you got all these living cells. They have all this code. Wow. All that code and programming. Now, consider the contrast here. We have a code called DNA in every living cell that is sending a signal to us. Hey, this is what this cell is going to do. And in your code as a human, your complexity, your ability to create science fiction and mathematics and music and everything else is all programmed into your DNA molecule. Hey, that kind of complexity, we don't even match that complexity in our computer programming. And yet we recognize that was intelligently designed. Well, here is code screaming at us. Intelligent design. Now compare that to dits and dashes. All right, so we're spending millions of dollars searching the heavens for these radiation signals, looking for signs of coded intelligence in radiation. And here in all our cells, all of life on Earth, evolutionists are overlooking the fact that you have far greater complexity, far more overwhelming evidence of intelligent designed code than you're looking for out in outer space. How is it that you can justify concluding there's intelligent design in radiation signals when you can't even compare the complexity of the DNA molecule to the simplicity of the radiation? The evidence is overwhelming that this is intelligently designed. So if you can argue the case that you can see the difference between random code and radiation from intelligent design code and radiation, how much more in just molecules floating around an intelligently designed molecule called DNA? That just screams at you, doesn't it? Now, the Human Genome Project was completed in 2000. There was a big race, and it's an interesting story. But as a result of that, there is a mass of human code that's been dumped into the internet. Technology of human DNA and code decoding, and then the internet. They've dumped this out, and there's a movement called ENCODE, and ENCODE is all about taking all this data. There's more data about the DNA molecule than anyone can consume. So they thought, hey, let's just get everyone in the world, amateur and professional alike, and start searching the database and just, hey, you guys can do this. It's available to you. It's free. You can go out there and help and contribute to the ENCODE process, linking proteins with genes that are producing those proteins, which then produce an effect on the cell or a living organism. So you have different associations here. What does this gene do? Well, the ENCODE program is showing us a lot. Now, here's the significance of this. Anybody ever heard of junk DNA? Yeah, junk DNA. Well, after the Human Genome Project was completed, they realized they were astounded. Number one, they thought there'd be 300 million genes coding for all the complexity of humanity, and it turns out to be 30,000. 30,000 genes for all this complexity. How do you explain that? It was astounding. That doesn't seem like enough information. 30,000 genes. And then you got all this junk that doesn't do anything, or what they thought. But through the ENCODE program, it was discovered that, wow, this, what a lot of this junk, so-called unnecessary DNA is, it's very necessary. It's a bunch of switches in there, put into the DNA molecule that's drawing on the 30,000 gene products to put them together in different patterns and different orders to do different things. For example, if you, I was trying to think of a good example here, and all that comes to mind is Napa Auto Store down here. You know, you got different parts, and they're mass producing parts. And if you go look at the shelves, they're probably only carrying maybe 3 or 4 particular parts, because you don't want to, you don't want to carry 100 carburetors for a Ford 2006 on the shelf. I mean, are you going to sell them all? Well, it might take 20 years, but you don't want that. That's a waste of inventory there and money. So you just carry what you need, or you order it. Well, that's what the DNA molecule is doing. It orders it as it's needed. And so rather than have a code, a gene for every molecule that has all these redundant parts in these protein molecules, the gene which codes for the proteins, well, I know that's starting to sound a little awesome, huh? But here you have this gene code. Rather than have a gene that produces a full protein that has shared parts in that protein with other genes, what God has done in designing the DNA is far more complicated and intelligently designed. You've got switches in the junk DNA that calls on, hey, I need this part for this protein, the same one that's used in 100,000 other proteins, but I need that gene over there and its product to pop in here. And so it keeps using the same genes over and over to produce, by other genes, to produce different proteins. How do you talk about complexity and intelligent design? There's no simplicity in that. That's switches of all kinds, and think about diagramming that on a computer program. Yeah. Well, computer programmers do that. They're called subroutines. So you got a main routine, you got subroutines, and the main routine calls upon subroutines that are being used over and over again for different things, right? Yeah. The DNA molecule is designed to do that. It's just mind-boggling. And and evolutionists can say, oh, it just happened by accident. I've never seen anything like it. And in the Genome Research Journal of 2012, it says, the deeper we probe into the space of the genome, the more complex it becomes. Not simpler, more complex. And greater complexity means what? More demand that it has to be intelligently designed. Yeah, it just screams at us. Now, when you look at the eye, this is fascinating. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next couple of slides here, but I just want to make the point that when we actually look at our bodies and some of the organs that we've got, it's just fantastically designed and created to the point where we just have to shake our heads and say, well, how could it be anything else but design? There's an astronomist by the name of Robert Jastrow. I used to read his stuff. He's an evolutionist, but he was astounded by the design that evolution has produced by accident. It just got here. And he was talking about the eye, and he says the eye appears to have been designed. No designer of telescopes could have done a better job. How could this marvelous instrument have evolved by chance through a succession of random events? It did. I mean, to the evolutionists. That's why when I show you laws of probabilities and so on, they do this not to disprove themselves, but to be astounded that it happened in spite of the odds. It's astounding to them. Many people in Darwin's day agreed with the theologian William Pauly, who commented, "There cannot be a design without a designer." He says it's noteworthy that there is no evidence for the evolution of the eye. Jay Gould, who's now deceased, but it was at the forefront of paleontology research and evolution, he says, "The eyes of the early trilobites, for example, have never been exceeded for complexity or acuity by later arthropods. I regard the failure to find a clear vector of progress in life's history as the most puzzling fact of the fossil record." No, he's an evolutionist. He knows it's a fact. He came to the University of Arkansas and gave a lecture and a panel discussion. I had an opportunity to ask him a question. And he said the question was about his position on evolution. Why is it that you write about these puzzling facts that can't be accounted for by evolutionary process, but you believe that evolution is a fact? And he said because, and this is important, because of the fossil record. He said that's what it comes down to. Now that's important because if you want to know how to argue best your case or rebut someone, you got to find out what they feel is the strongest case. Well, they think it's the fossil record, and for good reason, by the way. Although I'm going to show you tomorrow night, we'll talk about the fossil record. I'm going to show you that today, by today I mean in recent time, the articles are coming out, and I've got a quote by a guy that says, "Well, the fossil record never was important to evolution." Yeah, for good reason they don't think it's important anymore. Anyway, I'll show you some interesting things they have to say. Anyway, it says Levi Seti wrote of the shocking early appearance of the early design of eye design in evolutionary history, saying, "This optical doublet is a device so typically associated with human invention that its discovery in trilobites comes as something of a shock. The realization that trilobites developed," see, they're shocked. They're amazed that it happened anyway. The realization that trilobites developed and used such devices, that is their eyes, 500 million years ago, makes the shock even greater. And a final discovery that the refracting, what he's getting at is the eye, the more we learn about it, it's so incredibly complex. How could it have appeared so early in such simple early life forms? It's just shocking that it happened. So it's just shocking. It's not impossible. It's not evidence that it didn't happen. It's just shocking that it happened anyway. That's what it comes down to. So the eye is evidence. And then we talk about the brain. 3 pounds of the most complicated material in the universe. A computer specialist wrote, "The human brain itself serves, in some sense, a proof of concept. Its dense network of neurons apparently operates at a petaflops." What is a petaflop? What? Okay. Yeah, good. What's that? Trillion? It's 10 to the 15th. So that's a quadrillion is what it is. That is how many times it processes information a second. And the only reason they can get there is because they went beyond the the materials, which was the limiting factor. And now they're using light and magnets. Yet the whole device fits in a 1-liter box right there. So now you know what the size of your head is. A 1-liter box, and uses only 10 watts of power. So anyway, that's a computer scientist for you, huh? They got the brain. It's a computer. G. Simmons wrote, "Every bodily action is coordinated by conference calls between millions of neurons in the brain simultaneously. Imagine a multinational corporation with 35 billion employees who stay in constant touch with each other and are capable of making trillions of decisions every millisecond." That's what's going on inside that 1-liter box right there. Whoa. Now, we would say the only way an employee-based operation of 35 billion employees and trillions of decisions being made every millisecond, we would say that takes a lot of intelligent design and organization, doesn't it? I mean, it just doesn't happen by accident. A bunch of 35 billion people just randomly say, let's make some decisions here, and it makes it all work. It doesn't work that way. It has to be intelligently designed. We look at, here's something. I was reading a Smithsonian journal, and it occurred to me, this is very interesting, body symmetry. You consider the symmetry in forms. You would expect something that just sort of happens haphazardly and by accident. You know, if you do have an arm here, why isn't your arm coming out of your back or out of your head or, you know, out of one side of the leg? And why two? Why is there an arm here and an arm here, not a third arm? Why do you have two legs here? I mean, look at the symmetry. You split yourself down, you're bilateral, symmetrical, and they're mirror images. And I mean, does that say, oh, that just happened by accident? You always see symmetry and match mirrored images, right? No, you don't. You don't see that sort of thing. It doesn't make sense that it just haphazardly happened. Body design, symmetry screams intelligent design. Then in the Smithsonian Magazine, I also took note that there was an article saying a lot of our ingenuity and creation of streamlining and making a lot of our products, our boats, our planes, and so on more efficient in their design, we look to nature for our inspiration and for understanding how to really make it work. Well, that makes mindless molecules more intelligent than intelligent man. I mean, that's where we're going to find the superiority of design and efficiency. We go to nature where these things just happen by accident. And that when we say that was not intelligently designed, and we are designing the stuff that looks more like it just sort of happened by accident. And then my favorite example is the bombardier beetle. This little creature, when it's under attack, a predator comes, it is shooting out hot hydrochloric acid, HCl, about 100 degrees. When there's a reaction that takes place, it's got two chemical sacs. Can't combine them in the body because it'll blow its rear end off, and then you don't have any more bombardier generations coming along. And can you imagine? Just imagine this. Here you've got bombardier beetles who are accidentally evolving, and they're trying to figure out you can't mix these chemicals in your body. Well, how do you have enough surviving to pass that information on to the next generation? It just doesn't happen. So if it's an accident, how can these things be in existence? It just doesn't make sense. All of this screams at us for intelligent design. It's been said, if you look at the design of a single cell, there's no such thing as a simple cell. There are simpler cells, a prokaryotic cell, a germ cell, a microbial bacterial cell is simpler than a cell out of a human body. It doesn't have the complexity of membrane-bound organelles and so on, but it's highly complex. And when you look at a cell, it's more complicated than just the entire infrastructure and coordination that makes a city operate. That's just taking place in one cell. And then when you got a multicellular organism like humans, they all have to be coordinated together. That's simply incredible. And today, we're not, the way medicine and biologists look at the human body, we can't look at ourselves, just our own cells. I mentioned 100 trillion germ cells, or we'll just say bacterial cells, microbial cells in your own body. To have a more accurate picture of what it means to be human, you have to take the human microbial genome and add it to the human body itself, because you would not operate as a normal human without all your microbial friends. You are what you are, and you eat what you eat and are able to do what you do because of these 100 trillion additional cells added to your life. That's what allows you to be human. In fact, they have found that there are bacteria in your gut that actually produce chemicals that affect the vagus nerve, which affects your mood, which there are some researchers now looking at what kind of bacteria can we feed people. They're looking at animals, not people right now, that will affect their moods. they have been able to resolve or to solve depression in mice. And now, I've never seen that research. I don't know what a depressed mouse looks like. But I'm sure they do exist. And they're publishing the results. But they're using microbial, that is nutritional, food that you eat. They're using bacteria in the gut to solve the problem of depression. You see, that's why they're saying you can't just look at the human body itself. You have to consider all the cells involved, because microbial cells are producing byproducts, which are molecules that are touching off other molecules and nerves in your body, which are sending signals and affecting your behavior. Wow. Life just got even more complicated. So we are a very fascinating interrelational type organism that involves everything around us. And so as we're developing the sophistication and accuracy of understanding who we are as humans and all life forms, we're recognizing, wow, this thing has really been put together with some highly intelligent design. Okay, so and I'm not going to talk about fine-tuned universe, except I'll just give you a list here, 7 things if you want to see those. We got strong nuclear force constants and weak nuclear force constants, gravitational forces, and so on. And I think if I get into that, you're going to phase out even more than I see. But I'll just point this out. If you take each one of those 7, and there's far more than these 7, but if you take each one of these, and for example, a strong nuclear force determines what the holding together of the protons in an atom. So you got protons and neutrons in the nucleus of the atom. You got the electron orbiting the nucleus, right? What holds those things together? I mean, positive charge and a positive charge. 2 protons have the same magnetic charge. What happens when you put 2 magnets together with the same end, 2 norths, they go. So what's holding these things together? Strong nuclear force. They can overcome the magnetic force, but it only happens at a very molecular level, atomic level. Now, if these forces, any one of these forces and more, if any one of these forces was just the tiniest, I mean unimaginably small alteration, just a little more, greater force, or just a little less. If it was just a little less, the centers of the atoms would fly apart and there wouldn't be anything around here. There would be no matter. We couldn't exist. I mean, it's been fine-tuned that way. Why is it that when you consider just this list of 7, how is it that why is the electron, why does the electron possess the force of magnetism that it does? Why that amount? Why the proton that much? Why the neutron that much? Why that mass? Just a little difference, not only in their forces, but in the ratios as well. Nothing here would exist as it does. Life could not exist. That's what they mean by fine-tuning. The forces that exist in creation have been adjusted with such fine-tuning. It's exactly what is necessary to allow life to exist. Fine-tuned universe. Fascinating topic and something you can follow up on. So design evidence for supernatural origins. We see complex non-random design in the DNA molecule. Screams out design, intelligent design. Complex design and function of organs, symmetry of body designs, complex design and behavior, irreducible complexity, fine-tuning. I've got some things in here we haven't talked about. But the point is, man, the evidence mounts and mounts. Every time you look at something, more evidence for intelligent design. You know what that does? It gives us good reason and good cause to conclude that there's an intelligent designer behind the creation of all things, and a reason then, I'm showing the systematics and how the idea connects with the next topics. We have reason then to investigate the intelligent design behind the universe, behind life, and behind species. Now, take a note here of the organization of these origin topics. Origin of the universe, origin of life, origin of species. If you hear a debate between an evolutionist and creationist, typically here's what you're going to hear. The evolution is going to present the case for speciation, number 3. And they're going to talk about mutation and natural selection forces. And then they're going to cite the fossil record, and they're going to lay out their case. And nowadays, they've added one additional important critical information, or the disqualifying of information. After they get done laying out their arguments for speciation and the fact of mutation and natural selection, then they say the first life, the original life, is not evolution and doesn't need to be discussed. And the origin of the universe is not a part of evolution and doesn't need to be discussed. Anybody heard that? Recognize that? Well, that's the strategy, and that's what's going on in our textbooks in public schools now. Evolution is no longer like Theodosius Dobzhansky, a famed evolutionist in times past. We used to show a film with him in biology class, and he'd sit there and he'd say, all scientists accept the fact of evolution, just as all scientists accept the fact that the earth revolves around the sun, not vice versa. And then in his writings he says that evolution encompasses everything from the Big Bang or the origin of the universe up to man. And so you have this progression of the origin of the universe, origin of life, origin of species. But since the evolutionists have been losing the debates on the origin of life and origin of the universe, now that's not evolution. All right. They are going to specialize in speciation, and if they do involve the other, they're going to argue backwards. A creationist then in the debate is going to start out with the origin of the universe and then develop into life and into speciation. They're going to go 1, 2, 3. The evolutionist has to go 3, 2, 1 and argue backwards. Why? Because the laws are against them. The laws of science argue against them, and they've been losing the debate as a result, and now they're saying they're not even involved. 1 and 2 are not even a part of evolution. But that's why in debates, especially early debates, and when I was first looking at it, see, your evolutionists, your creationists are debating like this. They're not coming head to head. They're like this. And that's why it's confusing and didn't make sense. And so if you're still using some of that material, just realize why you might be left scratching your head. How do I make sense out of this? Why doesn't it make sense? Because it's probably doing this. So look at the direction and the development of thought. That's probably where the failing is. Now, if we look at the evidence for the universe, hey, there's only 2 arguments you need, 2 evidences. And that is the first law of thermodynamics and the second law of thermodynamics. All right. Anybody have a question? All right, then we'll move on to origin of life. All right. Yes?
What is if that's the thrust of the movement at this point is to get away from origin of the universe and all that, how do they plan on figuring that out later? I mean, how do they...
No, it's on hold. This is a strategy to establish that evolution is a fact and everybody needs to accept it. And it's being used as the wedge ultimately to separate people from a belief in God. Because that if you accept the evolution of species, then the next 2 will fall, is what they figure, without developing the arguments. But they have to drive this wedge in thought, an idea between there being a God or no God. So evolution then pits itself against God. And so this is how I understand, how I interpret the strategy going on. This is why the war has turned into semantics, where they're redefining the word theory. Theory is no longer just an advanced hypothesis like I defined last night, but it's a fact. And the reason why they're doing that is because everyone knows there's the theory of evolution. You can't censor that out of all the materials that have ever been written about evolution, but you can redefine the word theory so people think of it as fact. When they see the theory of evolution, they think the fact of evolution. This is a sort of instruction, and it is, if you want to see it, it's the National Center for Science Education, NCSE. Eugenia Scott heads that up out of the Washington, D.C. office, and she gives a lot of guidance. The organization gives a lot of guidance on how to the biology textbook publishers, what kind of language to use and how to use it and why to use it. And that's what's going on. And so it's a lot of propaganda and a lot of spin on and usage of semantics to try to bring people into conformity and accepting evolution as a fact. Okay, do we need to stand up and take a break, 5-minute break, and then I'll take you through the laws of thermodynamics. They're simple arguments. It sounds daunting, but everyone knows what a thermos is. Thermo, heat, dynamic, energetic. So you got heat energy, dynamic, heat on the move. That's all that means. And so I'll show you how that works. An argument you can take and use on your friends tomorrow. All right? So we'll take a 5-minute break. Is that what we need? 5 minutes. When we are talking about the evidence for supernatural origin of the universe, we're talking about looking at empirical evidence. And last night I defined that as being physical, tangible evidence. We have the laws of science. Also, I pointed out something important last night, and that is the laws of science are the closest thing you have to proof. Science doesn't provide proof, because for proof in the physical world, you'd have to be omniscient, you'd have to be God. And nobody claims to be God, and we know that tomorrow, whatever we know today might be discovered as wrong, and we have to change our ideas tomorrow. So evolution, that's why scientists say you can't know anything for certain, and that's why they get so upset when creationists say, I know absolutely certain that God created. And so it just riles them up. What scientists do is they try to disprove, and if they can't disprove it, then it might be right. And the more often they can't disprove it, the more likely it is to be right. And so then we operate on laws. It's the closest thing we can get to proof. And laws in science they're a law right now because there's no reason to think that they can be refuted or ever will be refuted. So, the first law of thermodynamics is the idea that energy cannot be created. That is, you can't have a chemical reaction and get more out of the chemical reaction than what went into it. Something cannot come out of nothing. Nothing can't produce something. And yet there are those who say it happened anyway in the Big Bang. So we use the first law of thermodynamics that says basically whatever goes into a reaction comes out of a reaction. Every molecule that goes in has to be accounted for. You can't gain or lose energy of in any form in a reaction. Now, think about this. Everything in the universe is, well, if it exists and we can see it, it's energy. Remember E equals mc squared? Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. This is Einstein's beautiful, simple equation that shows us that everything, even material things with mass, are a form of energy. That means mass, well, a handful of dirt, has something in common with the radiation of light, with heat energy, with every form of energy. Everything is related, and one form of energy can be converted into another form of energy. And so we have this relationship described here, and everything in the universe is energy. If everything in the universe is energy, and energy can't create itself, how did it get here? Well, if it didn't create itself naturally, then it must have been created supernaturally. Now, you see, it's not that we theorize that something cannot create itself naturally. It's a law of science that says something cannot create itself naturally. It's a law. It can't happen. We know that it can't happen. It's been demonstrated in the laboratory over and over again. The creation science model is supported by a scientific law, empirical data. Empirical means physical, tangible evidence, laboratory. Evolution proposes only natural explanations, regardless of the evidence. No, it had to have. We can't have the supernatural. We can't have God. It's unscientific. Therefore, it happened anyway. But wait, you've contradicted the first law of thermodynamics. Oh, well, here's what they're doing. There's no rebuttal to this, except this. Lie. I told you about the debate that I had with the philosophy professor, and the night before he met with the particle physicist at the U of A, and who told him, oh yeah, something comes out of nothing. You just tell the audience something can come out of nothing, and it was demonstrated in twice now in the laboratory that something can come out of nothing. Well, that's what he said. And he was talking and saying that. I'm looking out in the audience. I'm wondering, how many engineers do we have? What he was saying is the first law of thermodynamics does not say that something cannot come out of nothing. And it's one of their main arguments against me. They try to ridicule what I say about the first law of thermodynamics. Because the way I describe it is, first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created by natural means. Oh, it just drives them up the wall, and they keep attacking me on it. You'll never find that in a book. So I keep saying, well, science is all about natural, all about empirical, and so when we're deriving a law, we have to apply it to the natural world. But you won't find it in a textbook. It doesn't say that. Their argument is this. If you say natural, then you can conclude the supernatural as an alternative. So they want to take the word natural out of that description. So in a lecture that I was giving on campus one day, and they were there, and he was bringing this argument up and chiding me for it. And so I said, well, all right, what's wrong with this description? That's exactly what I heard. Nothing. You see, so it was really a good tactic to take, because rather than try to justify the word natural in there, finally I put it on him and said, all right, what's wrong with this description? You see, there is nothing wrong with that description. That's the point. It was just something for them to hang on to and attack. Now, they do say that something can come from nothing, and as unbelievable as it sounds, it is unbelievable that someone would say that in light of the first law of thermodynamics, so I put this quote here. And so here we've got a physicist who says, imagine no space at all and no matter at all. To the average person, it might seem obvious that nothing can happen in nothing, but to a quantum physicist, nothing is in fact something. Now, I happen to know what he means. And he doesn't mean nothing as in nothing. But I'm not going to explain it, because if they want to sound like the village idiot, then I'm going to let them sound like the village idiot. I'm not going to do the apologetics for them. This is what they're saying, and they say it this way, and they deliver it to the layman and the audiences out there because they want you to think that something can come from nothing. So they don't tell you what they mean. See, that's a bald-faced deception going on right there. They know that what you're thinking is not what they're thinking, but they won't explain it. And that's what they did during that debate that night. Well, based on this claim that something can come out of nothing, that contradicts a scientific law, a natural law that is understood. Models that contradict laws that are unscientific. Therefore, evolution's interpretation of the origin of the universe is unscientific. Why? It contradicts a known natural law, for which there are no known exceptions, and it's irrefutable as of today. And as Dr. Harder would say, laws are meant to be broken. Okay, fine, I have no problem with that. However, As of today, that law is unbroken. And as of today, only explanations that conform to the laws known today, only those that conform to the laws and don't contradict them, are considered scientific. Evolutionists are hopeful to break the law, hopeful to explain. But until that day, they are proposing an unscientific explanation. That's how we should understand it. So their rebuttal then is, the next counterpoint is, well, it didn't have to create itself, it's always been here. All right, now that's why we have to deal with second law of thermodynamics. You see, first law of thermodynamics, they lose the debate point, right? So now they have to say, well, it didn't have to create itself, it's always been here. All right, second law of thermodynamics then says, boy, that looks complicated. Let's just say usable energy cannot be created, cannot be increased in a closed system, or by way of analogy, clocks don't wind themselves up. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Everything's winding down. The universe is going through a process called heat death. Heat death because ultimately the end of all things will be radiation, heat, just low-level heat. And so everything's winding down and deteriorating, and it's called entropy. Entropy is a term that refers to chaos, disorder, disorganization. There is a rebuttal to that even in a system of chaos and disorder, it's not really disorder. You always have organization somewhere deriving energy from another part of the system in the closed system. They have their argument there, but the point is that the net, you take the entire system, regardless of the energy over here that's organized from the disorder over here, there's still a loss of organization, and it ultimately becomes heat energy and maximum chaos or disorder. Entropy is considered the arrow of time. That's why you can't have a time machine going back, because to have a time machine that goes back in time, you'd have to see waterfalls, water going up the fall, not flowing down. It has to be able to go up. You have to see eggs being putting themselves back together. That would be required. To reverse time, you have to have these things happening. You'd have to see a burning house. You'd have to see all the smoke and ash come back together and organize the house. So see, entropy prevents that from happening. So entropy is considered here the arrow of time. You go one direction. So for life, we all know our end point, physically, we're going to an end point of death. I mean, no one escapes it. We never get younger. We never reverse this. This is the way entropy works. So it prevents reversal of time. We are going in one direction. Clocks don't wind themselves up. I have a solar clock example here. It's deriving energy from the environment, or I've got the clock from Prague there. The example here is that clocks do not wind themselves up. If I had a clock right here, and I put it inside a box and locked it up and nobody could get to it, and it was ticking, and you looked at it and said, hey, that clock is ticking. What do you assume had to happen in order for that clock to be ticking? Someone must have got inside there. You see, that's what is meant by the second law of thermodynamics being defined in a closed system. You can't get into it. It's closed. If it was an open system, like you're an open system, you keep putting food in your mouth and you just keep energizing yourself. But if you're in a closed box and you can't get energy into the system, it tick, 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 tock. And it stops. That's entropy at work. That's the second law of thermodynamics. The only way to get that clock ticking is to get it into an open system or have something outside. Well, the universe itself is like a giant clock. Now, what that means is the universe itself, even if the evolutionists, in the evolutionary description, we have a big bang, so the universe starts spreading and exploding and growing and organizing itself. But there's a problem. The universe is the closed system. So then they proposed the idea of the spawning universes, that universes spawn new universes and spawn new universes and more universes, and it's all ad infinitum. We have just this untold numbers of universes. All you have to say is, what's the evidence for that? How do you know there's more? We don't even know where the edge of our own universe is. How do you know that there's more universes out there? See, they make these things up, all right? And one of the reasons for the principle of the spawning universes is because the probability, fine-tuned argument it goes back to, the probability of life existing on a planet or having a planet that is so fine-tuned that it could exist is so astronomically unlikely that you got to have almost infinite numbers of universes in existence just to make it all happen. That's the power of that fine-tuned argument. So they proposed that. But of course, they're just throwing it out there because they don't have any evidence for it. And so all you have to do is, I was sitting there in a debate. I got ambushed one day. Ambushed in the sense that a group of atheists used a student of mine, and they set up a decoy, a girl, and he kept telling me, oh, this girl is really interested in learning about creation. You need to meet with her. And so I set up the meeting, and then I got there, and the Lord already told me that morning, you're going to see these two guys. Sure enough, she's standing in the driveway. I drive up, and she says, oh, by the way, I have two friends who want to sit in on the meeting. Well, these two guys and I have history. They're nasty. They write nasty things about me on the internet. That's the way they are. They can't just come in nonchalantly and sit there for a meeting. And it wasn't a discussion between me and the girl. It was a discussion between me and them. That's what it was. So they were ambushing me, catching me off guard. And we got into this debate on the origin of the universe, and he's telling me about all these bubbling universes. So I said, tell me, what is the evidence? Oh, well, there's great authorities who have written about this and have the evidence. And I said, what is the evidence? Now, I don't want your argument by authority. In philosophy, that's a fallacious argument. You appeal to an authority. Big deal. So what is their evidence? Not their authority. Their credentials is not evidence. It simply means that they should know what they're talking about. So what is the evidence that what they're saying is right? See, these are little things that people get caught up into and persuaded. And if you don't recognize or are involved in it, you can get sucked into it and be persuaded. But they have nothing. So the important thing for you to remember is you don't have to believe in evolution. You don't have to abandon creation. No matter how good their arguments are, if you start breaking it down, there's fallacies. It's one fallacy built on another fallacy. Well, the universe is like a giant clock ticking. The universe is experiencing heat death, and this gigantic clock, all these orbiting planets and suns and galaxies and solar systems, and they're all swirling around like giant gears in a clock, right? What is the clock doing in the closed system? Tick, 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 tock. And so it's got an endpoint. If the universe has an endpoint, then it must have had a beginning point. It couldn't have always existed. That was the rebuttal, right? It's always been here, didn't have to create stuff. Well, now wait. If it's got an endpoint, and we can demonstrate it's got an endpoint, then it had to have a beginning point. If the universe is unwinding, who wound it up in the first place? What does the second law of thermodynamics say? The universe, energy, cannot wind itself up by natural means. Well, if it can't wind itself up by natural means, then it must have been wound up supernaturally. You think you can share that with a person? Sure, you can share that. It's just that simple. And you can look at more information on the website. CreationInsights.org is there for you. The creation science model is supported by the empirical scientific data. Now, what do evolutionists do? Well, they say it all happened naturally anyway, in spite of the laws. Well, that means you're contradicting a law of science. That's a problem, isn't it? Evolution proposes that order came out of an explosion. Nothing exploded and produced everything else organized in the universe. And they show you these beautiful pictures of how it happened. and how from this big bang everything organized and came about, and it's really nice and beautiful and designed by accident. But you know what? The only product I've ever seen from an explosion looks like that. I've never seen something explode and produce these nice organized pictures that the artists draw. This, all I see is mass chaos coming out of explosion. I never see things pulling together. Evolution is contradicting a law of science. Laws are meant to be broken. Yeah. Well, I'll wait for that law to be broken, but as of today, it's not a broken law. And if any idea you propose that contradicts the laws that exist today is unscientific. Therefore, evolution's interpretation is unscientific. The only explanation that's consistent with and supported by the laws of thermodynamics is the creation model. So the universe must have been created supernaturally. You've got the science on your side. You see how you take the physical, tangible, empirical, scientific evidence and argue for the supernatural origin? When you start out, the evolutionists say, you can't demonstrate supernatural from the natural. And on the surface, that appeared logical. But see, the laws support it's forcing you. This is not what they call the God of the gap argument. Well, I don't know how it happened, therefore God. And God gets blamed for everything that we can't explain. No, this is just the opposite. It's because of what we do know, what the laws do say. The laws say it can't happen naturally, then we're forced to draw a conclusion that must happen naturally, not because we don't know how it happened, but because we do know what the science says. It tells us it didn't happen that way. Well, Sir Arthur Eddington, who was an astronomer, says, if your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There's nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation. If you're going to continue to hold on to a theory that contradicts the laws of science. And then Dr. Van Wylen says, the author has found that the second law of thermodynamics tends to increase conviction that there is a creator. See, to argue the case for the supernatural origin of the universe, you just need to know two laws. First law of thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics. You have won the debate hands down. What did you win? Origin of the universe. Not life or not species yet. That comes tomorrow. So we will pick up here with origin of life tomorrow, but to wrap things up, we have demonstrated the simplicity of arguing the case for the creation science model for the origin of the universe. Now, because we are arguing with the laws of science, you have the most hardcore evidence that science and the world can provide for you. And it supports your model, your creation science model. It contradicts and disproves the evolutionary natural explanation as of today. And I say that for their benefit. As of today. All right, so tomorrow we might discover we're all wrong. Well, I'll wait. I won't hold my breath on it. But you can continue to pursue that. But let's call it what it is as of today. The only scientifically consistent model with a scientific explanation is the creation science model. Amen? All right, if you have some questions, I'll be sticking around afterwards, and you can just let me know. I did get a survey sent to me last night from the website. If you go to creationinsights.org and you look at the right-hand column, there is a Creation Insights survey you can send to me. There is a conference evaluation as well. I like to publish all the good comments, and then I like to look at the critiques and make improvements. And so either way, I benefit a great deal from all your comments. And so I appreciate that if you do that. If you got access to the internet, go out on creationinsights.org. Look at that right-hand column. You'll see a pre-conference evaluation where you can send me questions that you want to hear answered, and then the survey and the evaluation form. All right? Amen.
Very good. Now, Did y'all learn anything tonight, or do I have to preach for an hour? Oh, okay. Well, I guess that didn't seem to go over big popular, so we won't do that. We do want to wake you up, though, before you drive home. So let's all stand, stretch. Adam, is Mansion over the Hilltop in that blue book?
It is in that.
Hmm?
It is in
It should be in there, shouldn't it? Everything is in that book, but almost.